We're proud to be with you here this evening, and Jennifer Brown will be doing most of the heavy lifting, and then I'll help out a little bit at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Bogard. I am pleased to be before you this evening to file the city manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 17 and the 5-year CIP for 2017 to 2021. So I'm going to give you an overview of the numbers. I'm not going to get into any great detail because we have a very exciting session of a series of 5 workshops where we will get into the detail. And I don't want to have any spoilers up front. But this filing this evening is the result of months of work efforts by yourselves and me and my staff and Mr. Bogard and all the departments and their department directors and their staff as well. The annual budget is the responsibility of the city manager. It is spelled out in the city charter that he's responsible to file a proposed budget. So that is what we're doing this evening, and there's a great level of effort going that goes into the budget, into the development, to ensure that what is funded meets not only the needs of our residents and our visitors, but that it's also fiscally conservative. Our focus for fiscal year 17 is meeting the current service levels in areas where we are seeing greater demands for services. Along with implementing our capital projects that the voters approved back in 2013 that are nearing completion. There is a continued emphasis on capital investment as we were seeing in the CIP, particularly on the street and drainage side. This budget that is filed this evening does not include any funding for the potential annexation of Greatwood and New Territory. Those areas will be addressed separately over the next couple of months, and we will be bringing that discussion forward to council for action after the beginning of the fiscal year. As we begin our conversation about the budget, it's important to highlight our city's financial strengths. We have our AAA bond rating affirmed multiple times this year on our tax-backed debt, and we received, once again, a clean audit opinion for fiscal year 15. These results are due to the leadership that is shown by City Council in adopting strong financial management policy statements, which you just did last month. And that is what we use as the guidelines to prepare this budget and to make long-term financial recommendations. Our diverse revenue streams are possible due to the economic activity that we've been able to build through our economic development department, always working to build our tax base with diverse companies that help us maintain a low tax rate for our residents. Additionally, we have a very stable utility rate. About 10 years ago, we did a rate study, and we implemented some pretty major changes in the structure of our rates that put more emphasis on the base rates and made us less dependent on volumetric rates. That has proven to be very stabilizing to our revenue streams. We've not seen the volatility in our revenue streams due to the wild weather we've had the last couple of years. We've gone from monsoons to droughts and back to monsoons again. And so that rate structure has served us well. Recent analysis of the city's sales taxes conducted by Buxton show that approximately 34% of the sales taxes in retail and food and entertainment sectors, which are our largest 2 sectors, come from city and ETJ residents, leaving approximately 66% of those largest sectors' revenues coming from non-resident sources. Overall, the city's sales tax revenues are sourced up to 74% from non-resident or commercial transactions. This benefits our residents by enhancing our non-property tax revenue streams. Overall, Sugar Land as a city is the 44th largest city by population in the state of Texas, but we're the 17th largest sales tax generator. That speaks to our economic base. We are able to leverage this revenue stream to reduce our property tax burden. The elasticity of this revenue stream, however, has risk to using this to support our operations. We did recently address this in our financial management policy statements. We reduced the maximum dependence on our sales tax to 50% of the general fund operating budget. And I'm happy to let you know that tonight's budget is 46% dependent on sales tax, so we're well under that 50% cap. The city's low tax rate is a direct result of the sales tax for property tax reduction that was implemented back in 1993. At that point, we had a 50-cent tax rate. And we have since lowered that tax rate about 18.5 cents, 18.4 to be exact. And that's 7.6 cents more than required. We're required to reduce it by 10.8 cents, and that's something we calculate each year. The benefit is that these sales taxes are paid, as I mentioned a moment ago, primarily by non-residents, and our residents see the benefit of that. As property taxes go, the 2016 TML Tax and Debt Survey, in the 25 cities in our population range, which is between 65 and 150,000, we have the second lowest tax rate. The group average was 57 cents, which is almost double our tax rate. With our 10% homestead exemption and our overage and disabled exemptions, our tax bill are about half what they would be in another country. I mentioned the financial management policy statement guidelines. We just recently reviewed and readopted those. There's statements in here directing the preparation of the budget as it relates to property taxes. And those, this is the excerpt from those statements. We build a budget around a revenue stream that from property taxes that we believe will result in an average annual increase of no more than 3%. To their average residential bill unless we're implementing a GO bond election. And historically, as you can see here, although we've had averages increases up or below the 3%, if you look from 2008 to 2013, the average bill increased just under 3% per year. 2 of those years, the average bill actually went down due to a decline in the average home value from the Central Appraisal District. After we implemented the GO bond election in 2014, the 2014 tax rate was 0.7 cents increase, and that combined with the increase in the average value of home in Sugar Land has brought in enough revenue to date that we haven't had to increase the tax rate again to implement this second issuance of GO bonds, which we're planning to do later this year. With the benefit of the increase to the homestead exemption this year, the average bill is anticipated to increase no more than 3% this year. As we prepare for the fiscal year 17 budget, we evaluated the current year to see how we're anticipating ending the year. The good news is that while some of our revenue streams are performing lower than expected due to slowdown in the economy, we have had some one-time revenues that have boosted our overall totals, so we anticipate ending the year at or above budgeted fund balances, and all of our expenditures are anticipated to be within current budgeted funding. This year we have faced some challenges. The Brazos River rose to record levels at the end of May, but our recent investments in street and drainage project helped to mitigate the risks to our residents. Where we would have had possible issues, our staff was there filling sandbags, and we have a picture of them filling sandbags, and placing them along University where we did see an impact from the river to try to protect our residents where the river was encroaching on University Boulevard. And I'm not aware that we had any structural flooding from that. It was all just street flooding. And we've also had a lot of progress this year on implementing our GO bond projects. And these are the renderings. You probably wouldn't want to see pictures now. They're kind of construction sites. But these are renderings of what the Brazos River Park and Festival site will look like when they're completed later this fall. We're adding resources to the budget to ensure that these facilities can be maintained to our standards. Earlier this year, we also annexed Cullinan Park, and we have taken on operations and maintenance responsibility for that. We've also, earlier this year, had a ribbon cutting for Settlers Way Park, where we added some facilities there. That has placed additional responsibilities on the Parks Department, so you'll see that we're putting some additional resources into that group. The 17 proposed budget totals just over $260 million, with $186 million in operating funds and $74.4 million in capital project funding. The general fund, which accounts for most governmental services, totals $78.26 million and is about a 3.3% increase from the current year budget. Like I said, as we go through the individual fund workshops, we'll get into this in much more detail. But tonight I just wanted to give you an overview to show you what it looks like at a high level. So the revenue assumptions that this year's budget were based on is consistent with the council-adopted financial management policy statements. We do have a budgeted decrease in our sales tax collection. We discussed this at our spring retreat. We do have an incentive agreement that is ending this year, and that combined with the recent economic changes are going to result in us collecting less sales tax in fiscal year 17 than we are collecting this year. So it's no surprise. We knew it was coming, but we just wanted to show that we're not seeing the growth that we thought we were going to see several years ago. You know, when we're looking at 17, you think it's going to be higher, but rather than leveling out, we're actually anticipating a decline based on the last couple of months' trends. For our property taxes, based on the Central Appraisal District preliminary tax rolls, we're anticipating revaluation of just under 5% for residential properties and about 8% for commercial. And we did increase the homestead exemption. Council voted to do that in June. So we have a total of 10% homestead exemption. That will net out to about a 3% increase for the average residential tax bill. The certified roll is due next week, so I don't have final totals. I can't tell you exactly what the tax rate's going to be to generate this revenue, but we're going to hit that 3% target. So it may be slightly different from the 31,595, but we're anticipating it being pretty close. I did receive another preliminary roll yesterday, and it's pretty close to what we're looking at, what we were looking at going into this. Fees and rates. There are no changes proposed to water and wastewater rates. This is the 6th year that we have not adjusted our water and wastewater rates. We did implement our surface water rates while we were doing that conversion, but since we started that process, we haven't adjusted the utility rates. But there are no changes to the surface water rates again this year as well. Our general user fees are anticipated to increase 1.3% based on CPI. This is actually a blending of 2 years worth of CPI increases, as last year's CPI was actually negative. And so we did not make any adjustment last year. We're buying down the 2% increase that was the CPI adjustment this year by last year's increase to get the 1.3% increase. And then our residential solid waste, I lost my mouse. We have a 2.5% increase built into the contract. This is based on the greater of 2.5% or the CPI, so we're hitting 2.5%. Republic also submitted a request for an additional 3% increase. We'll discuss this some more during the budget workshop. Staff is recommending a 2% increase be granted to them. We can have some further discussion on that, but the total 4.5% increase would put the residential rate at $18 beginning in January. Our major revenue sources. This graph will provide a visual representation of the various revenue sources that the city has to fund our operations. So the blue, which is seen to the left of the chart, represents our property taxes. Those only go to the general fund and the debt service fund. Red is our sales tax, and it goes to the general fund and the 4A and 4B corporations. You can see that the red makes up a much larger piece of the general fund than the blue does. So that's illustrating the 46% of our general fund funded by sales tax. The green in the general fund represents other taxes and franchise fees, and purple represents user fees and charges for services, which you'll see that in the general fund, and the utility fund and airport fund, which are 100% funded by user fees. So out of the $76.5 million in general fund revenue, we have 28% coming from property taxes, approximately 50% from sales tax, 8% from other taxes, and 15% from user fees, including permits and fines. So the fiscal year 17 operating budget contains the funding, as I mentioned earlier, necessary to fund our existing service levels that are defined by our departmental business plans, based on consistent direction from City Council on the expected levels of service. Those service levels don't change without input from City Council. So we ensure that we are maintaining consistent service levels. The funding for operations totals $186 million across all funds, including general fund, water utilities, surface water, airport, and solid waste. And those are our main operating funds. Any additions to the budget are focused on contractual increases due to the cost of doing business, where we have a CPI increase built in, along with increases for higher demands for services and implementing our capital projects. Those are the increases that we'll focus on during our discussion this evening. The proposed budget includes a total of 722.5 full-time equivalent positions, and that gives us a ratio of 8.23 FTEs, or full-time equivalents, per 1,000 residents. And the increases are being added to address some needs that we have identified during the budget process. And we have a total of 8.5 FTEs. These are the positions that we're recommending being added. And over the next few slides, I would just like to walk through each area and highlight the need for each position. And we will get into much greater discussion during the budget workshops. The additions in the general fund are focused on meeting service levels. In the food inspection program, we have seen continuing increases in the number of food establishments that need to be inspected, and we are needing an additional sanitarian to be able to maintain our current service levels. As I mentioned, in the Parks Department, they have the biggest increase due to the implementation of capital projects, as well as just more demand for their services with the annexation of Cullinan Park. So this slide will give you an example of some of the facility growth that has occurred within the Parks Department. We are recommending a crew chief and 3 general maintenance workers, along with the vehicles and equipment to be able to serve the crew. We will have the new facilities, including the plaza adjacent to the Smart Financial Center, will be some of the facilities that are maintained by this group. The Brazos River Park and Festival site were 2 facilities that were approved by voters in 2013. The maintenance of these sites will be funded through general property taxes. For non-city events held at the festival site, we have created a special revenue fund that will house an event manager position to manage both the special events permitting process and the reservation of the festival site. And so we are in the process of developing a fee structure that will recover the costs for the use of the festival site. We'll be discussing that with you at a later time. We haven't quite finished developing that fee schedule yet. In fiscal year 17, we anticipate completion of the city's first visitor center. The facility will be located in the Imperial Historic District, sharing space with the Sugarland Heritage Museum. The budget includes 2 new part-time positions and will be allocating responsibility for oversight to an existing position in the tourism fund for operations of the facility. This chart illustrates in the general fund where the funds go. So out of the $75 million in the general fund proposed operating budget, $35.6 million, or 48% of that, goes to public safety, police and dispatch, fire, and EMS. So you can see those are by far the biggest bars. Following that is general government at 16%, which includes our IT operations, human resources, and your general government services. Environmental and neighborhood services, which is the 3rd bar, and community development and parks all make up 7%, followed by finance with 5%. And these categories, as you can see, between the current budget for 16 and the proposed budget for 17 are remaining fairly stable. Okay, so we'll move on to the airport now. In the airport, we'll be taking on additional mowing and maintenance of the 95-acre airport tract that we're planning to close on from the prison unit later this summer. We are adding one general maintenance worker and a mower to mow all of that land. Additionally, the airport has agreed to mow the other 2 tracts of land that we'll be purchasing on a reimbursement basis. Those tracts are, in total, are actually bigger than the airport tract. So we were glad to have the airport take on that for us. And we'll also be adding a part-time custodian to keep up with our customer service needs in the terminal. The budget also includes a 3% merit pool to fund our pay-for-performance system. The increases are based on performance evaluations and are effective January 1. This year, in light of the economic downturn, we are recommending no movement to the overall salary structures. Salary structures are included as an appendix to the budget for reference. They will be adopted as part of the budget ordinance. We're also anticipating our health benefits costs increasing 6.2% for 2017, and this is particular to our medical benefits. And we're anticipating, well, we know we'll have a slight increase in the TMRS contributions. The city's rate will go from 14.85% to 14.99% beginning in January, and the city's plan at the end of December was 86% funded for our liability. So, moving on to capital projects. For fiscal year 17, the budget includes $74.2 million worth of projects. Tacking on an additional $200,000 for issuance cost gives us a total of $74.42 million that you saw earlier. 59% of the funding this year is dedicated to street and drainage projects, and surface water comes in third with 20% of the total at $14.62 million. And for funding sources, $50.7 million out of the $74 million is coming from the issuance of debt. It's about 68%. And the remainder is funded from either other funding sources, such as our agreement with the Imperial Redevelopment District for the construction of University Boulevard, or the Cullinan Foundation's funding of the improvements at the park. And then looking out over the 5-year period, our total is $176.9 million, and the percentages are actually very similar to what you see in fiscal year 17. We're very heavily weighted on the street and drainage improvements. It's about $100 million over the 5-year period. I do want to point out that we do fiscally constrain the 5-year CIP, and we only include projects in the CIP once we have completed 60% design. So we might have an out-year design, but we wouldn't put construction dollars in there until we get to 60%. So funding sources, similar to what we saw for fiscal year 17, are very similar. $121 million out of $176.9 is funded from the issuance of debt. This is about 69%, so very similar to fiscal year 17. And we have our other funding sources. So at this point, I will turn it over to Mr. Bogard, and then I will come back at the end to wrap up with some next steps.
Thank you. As Jennifer stated, Sugar Land maintains a low tax burden on our residents, but it's not because we scrimp on services. We have a very august array of services that we provide to our residents, whether that's sidewalk repairs, technology for our police department, landscaping improvements, or support of those that are done by HOAs. We do take very good care of the needs of our residents and provide a wide array of quality services. The city of Sugar Land conducted a citizen survey in the fall of 2015. Results of that survey indicate the citizens are highly satisfied with the services that they're receiving, which is why we work real hard to try to make sure that we're adequately funding the continuation of those services. And these services really exceed the norm compared to a lot of other cities. At the same time, residents acknowledge the value received for the tax dollars that they pay. That's a very important part of our annual citizen survey, and there was overwhelming positive response for the value that our residents receive. And the question that I think begs to be answered is, how does the city go about accomplishing this? It has to do with a sales tax strategy that goes way back 25 years to a group of leaders that were in charge of this city, sitting in the same seats you are, back in the early 1990s and into the middle 90s. City leaders proposed and residents voted to approve the use of local option sales tax to be devoted to property tax reduction and economic development. I believe this strategy really grew out of a deep culture in our community of entrepreneurialism that goes all the way back to our company town roots. And how has this strategy worked? The growth in sales tax over that same period of time has been astonishing since the voters approved the local option sales tax. 2015 saw sales tax exceed $50 million for the first time. And how is this $50 million used? In the chart, the purple and green at the top are the economic development sales taxes. And those are the sales taxes that are paying for projects like the conference center across the road, or the ballpark, or the new Constellation Field, the new Smart Financial Center theater that'll be opening after the first of the year. The red is the portion that was mentioned a moment ago, which is the portion that's used to buy down the property tax rate. And the blue is what subsidizes the cost of city services. Note that the red and blue are deposited in the general fund and aren't used and can't be used to finance debt. We use the growth in sales tax to lower the city's property tax rate from 50 cents at the time that the local options sales taxes were approved in 1993 to 31.5 cents today. And you can see the reduction, and it's about 18.5 cent reduction. You will also note that in the period around 2001, 2002, right around the 9/11 catastrophe that struck our country, we recognized that we were over-relying on sales tax to pay for operations. Remember, the operating budget, the general fund, is where all of the salaries for police, fire, EMS, public works employees, et cetera, is all funded. And the vast majority of the funding for the operating budget goes to pay for salaries. And unless you're going to be in a posture of regularly going through layoffs, which doesn't contribute to a positive working environment, you need to have a solid base of funding for those types of expenses. And so we made some adjustments, some recalibration after that time period, and have pretty much kept the split that you see represented for fiscal year 17 of a 14-cent debt tax rate and a 17-cent operations and maintenance tax rate. And the debt portion only goes to pay debt service payments, and the O&M portion helps us to pay for the cost of the operations of the city. The debt portion, of course, is extremely important to the city council and our residents because it's financing an extensive program of capital improvements and rehabilitation within our community. This is some relatively new information that we've gleaned from the Census Bureau, and it helps to explain how we have achieved such a significant growth in our sales tax. One reason for the continued growth is the growth in Sugar Land-based employment. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Sugar Land imports 55,000 workers while exporting approximately 33,000 workers. So we have 22,000 more workers that come into Sugar Land every day than leave Sugar Land. That means added to the folks that are in town shopping, that are students at colleges, patients at the hospitals, eating at the restaurants, visiting friends. We have a tremendous growth in the population every morning compared to the number of people that reside here in the evenings. This produces a considerable amount of commercial activity and the resulting sales tax that's generated. Our 4A and 4B corporations have been very successful during this 25-year time period as we've achieved a well-balanced commercial growth in the sectors of retail, office, and industrial. And every year we grow more diversified, although we are still largely tied to the base industry in the Houston region, oil and gas. We also have some extensive growth that's occurring in other industries that are helping to maintain our employment even in times when the price of oil falls. Jennifer mentioned a little bit ago about the property tax, and I wanted to highlight the fact that we maintain about a 63-37 balance in our tax base. That is continuing. We hope at full development of the city to be able to have about a 60% residential and 40% split of the tax base. Now, how does all of this relate to the homeowner? Our proposed budget assumes an average home value of $368,000. And the City Council has just gotten through increasing the homestead exemption to help offset some of the revaluation increase that has occurred. Assuming a flat tax rate, this would produce an average tax bill for a Sugar Land resident of $1,047, an increase of $28 over 2015. And since the city gives an additional $70,000 exemption for those over 65 or disabled, their tax bill is reduced to $826. Since the budget is built around an assumed property tax revenue, since we have not received the tax roll yet, any final increase in revaluation above the assumed value will result in surplus revenue that the City Council will consider after we receive the final roll. And I shared with you that our average tax bill is $1,047. And we also talked about the split of 17 cents and 14 cents of the tax bill. Well, the 17-cent portion that goes to O&M produces $565 a year to pay for the cost of police, fire, traffic control, parks and recreation, animal control, EMS services. It's a pretty good array of services for $565. It actually costs $2,048 a year, according to the budget that we're filing, and leaves us with an understanding that only 28% of the cost of providing services is actually paid for from property taxes. The vast majority of it, $1,483, is paid. 72% is paid from sales tax and other revenue streams. Also, each taxpayer supports $483 in debt service payments annually. And as you can see, there are no other revenue streams that help us pay for that tax-backed debt, which of course is very important for us to be able to continue to make investments and improvements to our neighborhoods and our city. And as Jennifer noted, of that sales tax piece that we talked about a moment ago, really only 26% is paid for by our own residents according to study results. Actually, what they did is they sourced where the sales tax is coming from by doing a study of visa receipts over a period of time and identifying the residence of the owner, and determine that only 26% of the sales tax that we are using to help fund services comes from Sugar Land residents. So we are vastly subsidizing the cost of services through growth that has occurred on the business side by visitors that are coming to our city and business activity that's occurring in our city. We really believe that we're benefiting the homeowners greatly from lower tax bills and higher quality services than if we followed the traditional tax and spend practices that result in most cities having a 57-cent tax rate in cities similar to the size of Sugar Land. In short, bear with me here, Donald Trump couldn't negotiate a better deal for our taxpayers. And that goes for commercial taxpayers too, because very few places in the state provides a vibrant commercial base activity with such a low tax burden for our businesses. So how do we sustain this? We need to educate our residents on the value that this strategy has produced. The city needs to maintain public support for economic development incentives and programs, the value of public-private partnerships with quality development partners, and the development of land that produces high taxable value properties. Finally, we need to be mindful of the lessons that we've learned regarding over-reliance on sales tax for operations. This chart illustrates the importance of being smart about growth and having growth that produces high-value development. You'll notice that Sugar Land Town Square produces 10 times the tax revenue per acre than the average development within the city. And then as far as the reliance on sales tax, this chart illustrates a monthly comparison between our actual receipts and our budget for the last fiscal year. And with the exception of the month of April, which was a one-time anomaly, unexpected payment that won't recur, we would have been down sales tax this year. So it's something that we have to be very mindful of. As this chart illustrates, over the last 17 years, you're going to see the growth in sales tax up and down. It's mainly been up. It's been a very positive decade and a half. But you will also see periods where it falls, and we need to be prepared for those situations, similar to what we are preparing for fiscal year 17. And finally, looking forward into the future, we have an array of very important projects that are going to be moving forward. Many of these are a direct result of the hard work that was done 2.5 decades ago that gave us the tools of the 4A and 4B Corporation. You see that in the fact that we are getting ready to purchase the prison property and the potential development of a business park there. Imperial Market, if you haven't seen the wonderful article in today's Houston Business Journal, you'll see the great progress that our business partners there are making. The announcements this last week of the first shows at the Smart Financial Center. The City Council has confirmed our direction on the development of a second hotel conference center in the area of the Smart Financial Center in Telfair Commercial TERS 4. And it also illustrates the importance that the Telfair TERS 4 area develop as a economic benefit to the entire region. And with that, I will turn it over back to Jennifer to tell you about upcoming meetings.
Thank you. All right, so we have a busy month of August set for you. We will start on August 16th with the opportunity for the public to provide input. We will hold a public hearing. We'll also have public hearings on August 23rd and September 6th on our tax rate, along with a public hearing on the Public Improvement District assessment on August 23rd. On September 6th, we'll be asking you to amend the current fiscal year budget and then take action on September 20th. But in order to get you ready to take all these actions, we have a series of budget workshops scheduled for you, starting not next week, but the following week on August 4th. And here are our proposed topics. We may move them around a little bit depending on when we actually receive the tax roll. But the plan is to do them from 7:30 to 9:30 on Thursday mornings here in City Hall. They are open to the public. And through these discussions, we will get into much more detail onto what's proposed for the budget, allow you to ask more in-depth questions and ensure that you are comfortable with what we're proposing for the current fiscal year 17 and also for the capital improvement program. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions of Alan or Jennifer? Bridget?
I don't have a question. I do thank you. I know that you put a lot of hard work into this. I just have a comment, and that is I'd like to review the employees that we'll be hiring and make sure that that work cannot be done by contract employees. When we hire someone to mow the prison property and we have to buy a mower, I want to make sure that makes sense, or should we just hire a contract company to do that? Thank you.
Steve?
I know that the 6.2% in growth in health benefits looks large. However, I just want to say, having served on the compensation committee, that the employees got together and worked very diligently on how to control costs, and this would have been a lot higher without the engagement of our employees. And so personally, I would like to thank each and every one of them for their hard work.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? A couple highlights, Alan. I'd like to, one, the budget workshops, to kind of reiterate, are open to the public. So that 7:30 to 9:30 is typically in the Kane room, which is in the room over there. We'd invite anybody from the public that is wanting to engage in that kind of minutia, department by department, line item by line item, some fairly detailed discussions. We'd love to have you as part of that. I'd also like to highlight the fact that Constellation Field, and you mentioned it, Alan, and the Smart Financial Center were built with sales and use tax dollars and not ad valorem tax dollars. So there were no property tax dollars that were allocated to either one of those venues. Yes, and then finally, I think it's a credit to staff that when we went before the public for the park bonds, and the park bonds were approved, and $31.5 million was approved for park bonds. And at that time, what we said was for every 10 million, that was a penny in debt. So effectively 3.1 cents. To date, we've only issued 0.7 cents. And we've continued over the last couple of years. It was very deliberate last year that if we kept the tax rate where it was, that we would not have a tax rate increase this year. That's been the protocol. That's been the plan all along. We've been very diligent with how we've done that. We've still managed to raise the homestead exemption from 8% to 10%. That's a long-winded way of saying that we are very serious about the effect on residents of property taxes and mindful, because all of us in this room pay those same taxes. So we're very mindful of that. So with that, Alan, thank you. Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have some light reading material to pass out to you at the end of the meeting.
I have no doubt.
I know you're all excited.
Yeah.